The lights that were meant to signal safety instead sounded alarm. For a second night in a chain of escalating incidents, warning sirens cut across central Israel, including in and around Tel Aviv, as authorities responded to reports of incoming aerial activity tied to an operation announced by Iran. Air defense batteries spun into action. Emergency teams fanned out across multiple districts to check infrastructure, to clear roads, and to account for civilians shaken by another round of alerts. And in the spaces between the missiles and the missile batteries, a political storm was gathering at home. From Jerusalem to the neighborhoods of central Israel, the latest episode intensified a familiar unease. Officials in Tehran framed the operation as part of a broader response to what they described as Israeli actions across the region. State-linked Iranian media presented the move as a strategic message, sustained pressure, calibrated to avoid outright full-scale war, but unequivocal in its intent. On the Israeli side, defense spokespeople said systems intercepted multiple incoming threats and urged civilians to follow safety guidance during alerts and temporary movement restrictions. They insisted in the measured language of security briefings that the country was prepared for any further escalation. That measured language has not stilled the political debate. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose government has anchored much of its recent public case on restoring deterrence and strengthening security, now faces renewed and loud criticism from opposition leaders, security analysts, and segments of the public. Opposition figures accuse the administration of failing to contain a widening confrontation, charging that repeated engagements with Iran and Iran-aligned groups have increased uncertainty rather than produced stability. Calls for emergency consultations and clarified strategy poured in to the Prime Minister's office and to the Knesset as lawmakers demanded answers about long-term plans and whether military pressure alone can prevent wider escalation. The politics are raw because the stakes are not only tactical but institutional. For months, the government has advanced a narrative that military strength and decisive operations will restore deterrence. Yet opponents say the recurrent alerts, the intermittent launches and intercepts, and the disruptions to daily life point to a cycle that is neither contained nor clearly bounded in time. In the public square and on the airwaves, commentators debated whether Israel is managing an unprecedented multi-front security challenge or caught in a prolonged confrontation that will have long-term political and economic costs. That debate is playing out against a regional backdrop already heavy with tension. The Strait of Hormuz, vital shipping lanes, and global energy markets have all featured in diplomatic conversations. Military deployments, naval maneuvers, and the dynamics of proxy engage. Imment across several countries mean an incident on one front can create friction elsewhere. International observers warn that modern regional confrontations rarely remain isolated. They spill across borders, infect economic confidence, and pressure allied capitals to respond or to mediate. If the most recent operation was intended as a calibrated signal, the reverberations show how signals and responses can produce unpredictable ripples. On the ground in Israel, the practical effects of repeated alerts are already visible. Businesses in central districts adjusted operations, some moving to remote work or pausing activity during periods of high alert. Transportation was disrupted, shoppers and commuters rerouted, and the small cumulative disruptions added to public frustrations. Economic analysts watching from outside the country flagged potential cost implications, investment decisions, respond to perceptions of stability. Markets react not only to physical damage, but to political uncertainty. Confidence, once shaken, can be slow to recover. Psychology matters here, even when defenses work, and interceptors do their job. The persistent ring of sirens tests civilian morale. Many citizens, the commentary noted, are growing fatigued after months of intermittent alerts and cross-border strikes. Some argued that a robust military posture is essential, that any perception of weakness will invite further pressure. Others urged a renewed emphasis on diplomacy and de-escalatory channels to limit the risk of continuous confrontation. The split reflects a deeper fault line. Do you double down on military deterrence, or do you open the way to negotiated pauses and back-channel talks in the hope of stabilizing the situation? Security experts speaking on Israeli media trace the shifting character of modern conflict. Drones, long-range projectiles, and coordinated operations involving allied groups now complicate traditional front lines. Psychological pressure, cyber capability, economic disruption, and political messaging have all become instruments of contest. What was once counted as a single battlefront can now be a mosaic of contests across space and domains: air, sea, cyber, and information. Analysts emphasize that the tools and the tempo of these operations increase the complexity of decision-making. Calibration becomes more difficult when an attack need not be attributed immediately, and a response risks widening the confrontation. Iranian officials, for their part, framed their recent operation as part of a wider, deliberate responding posture. Their state-linked outlets described the action as strategic rather than isolated, stressing that regional allies remain able to respond across multiple fronts. The intent, according to that narrative, is to apply pressure while avoiding a direct full-scale clash. That posture is no small challenge for Israeli policymakers, who must weigh immediate security responses against the risks of escalation, all while managing domestic political consequences. International reactions followed quickly. The United States reaffirmed support for Israel's security and urged restraint to prevent a broader regional conflagration. American officials continued an intense round of diplomatic contacts with regional partners, pressing for de-escalation even as they coordinated on ways to reassure Israel. Several Gulf states and other Arab governments expressed concern at the possibility of spillover, intensifying behind-the-scenes diplomacy aimed at preventing escalation that could threaten maritime routes, regional infrastructure, and energy markets. Diplomats in capitals across the Middle East and beyond are watching with a mix of caution and calculation, aware that the economic and humanitarian costs of a wider conflict would be severe. Public opinion inside Israel is fractured along familiar lines. Those who prioritize security support a firm military approach, warning that restraint could be misria, as weakness. Others, weary of constant alerts and the economic strain that follows, call for increased diplomatic initiatives to reduce the chance of repeated confrontations. The conversation is complicated by real fears. Investors weigh their choices, families weigh whether to relocate or expand contingency plans, and employers weigh continuity measures. Each siren is a reminder that the conflict's indirect costs, psychological, economic, and political, accumulate with every episode. And within the government, divisions have also surfaced, though the rhetoric from the defense establishment has been focused on preparedness. Military spokespersons described a range of responses: air defenses activated and intercepts conducted, emergency responses units monitoring situation reports, and civilian authorities advising temporary movement limits when necessary. At the same time, political critics seized on the disruptions as evidence that the government's strategy had not yet produced a dura. Deterrence. Supporters pushed back, arguing that Israel faces an unprecedented array of adversaries and proxy capabilities, and that the government's actions must be judged in that context. Analysts are quick to note that the shape of confrontation between Israel and Iran has evolved over many years. What began as a rivalry over regional influence and security now operates through a complex web of direct and indirect measures: covert operations, cyber attacks, asymmetric proxy engagements, and conventional strikes. Each side accuses the other of destabilizing the region, and each seeks to avoid the kind of all-out war that would invite catastrophic consequences across neighboring countries. Yet the risk remains that miscalculation or a poorly timed escalation could trigger a broader chain reaction. For Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the political calculus is especially acute. The latest developments have intensified criticism from opposition parties that question whether the government's approach will produce a sustainable security outcome. The debate is not simply tactical. It is about leadership, judgment, and how to balance military pressure with diplomatic channels that might forestall further confrontations. If domestic frustration grows, whether because of prolonged alerts, economic strain, or a sense of political drift, the pressure on the Prime Minister and on the governing coalition is likely to increase. Among foreign partners, the balancing act continues. Allies signal public support while urging restraint. Gulf states and other regional actors push for de-escalation, even as some actors keep open channels to influence events on the ground. Global markets, especially in energy, remain watchful because even limited clashes in the Middle East can have outsized effects on shipping routes, insurance costs, and commodity prices. Traders and analysts alike know that the stability of energy supplies is not guaranteed when naval and aerial operations surround strategic choke points. The human dimension is persistent and immediate. Across neighborhoods that have become accustomed to alerts, people spoke of frustration and increasingly of erosion of complacency. Parents recalibrate routines. Schools update contingency plans. Small businesses weigh the cost of interrupted days. Civil defense teams continue to drill and to improve response times, but even the most efficient system cannot entirely erase the anxiety that comes with uncertainty. As the international community watches, the fundamental question remains: can a cycle of calibrated strikes, counterstrikes, and strategic messaging be managed without slipping into a broader conflagration? Iranian officials present their actions as a message intended to sustain pressure without igniting an all-out war. Israeli officials insist on vigilance and readiness. Western partners call for diplomacy even as they support Israel's right to defend itself. Each side's statements are both signal and tactic. Each maneuver is calibrated with an eye to the other side's likely response. What emerges from these episodes is a new template for regional competition. It is not only about which side can deliver the more damaging strike, but about who can manage escalation, sustain domestic resilience, and shape international opinion. Psychological operations, cyber activity, economic measures, and targeted military strikes have become intertwined with traditional defense concerns. The result is a complex strategic environment in which leaders must not only decide how to respond to immediate threats, but also how their choices will reverberate across domestic politics, regional alliances, and global markets. In the coming days, the choice points will multiply. Will diplomacy find a path to reduce immediate tensions? Will back-channel contacts between regional capitals and global powers yield a pause long enough to recalibrate strategy? Or will the pattern of alerts and responses continue, imposing a slow, grinding cost on civilians, the economy, and political cohesion? For now, the immediate choreography is familiar: sirens, alerts, intercepts, assessments, and statements. But the implications are not routine. The repeated activation of defenses near cosmopolitan centers such as Tel Aviv underscores the reach of contemporary regional contestation. It forces a reckoning with how much endurance a society and its political leadership can sustain without a clearer endgame. Israel's emergency services and military maintain that they are prepared for whatever comes next. Iranian officials, through state-linked media, frame their actions as part of a broader strategic posture. International partners seek to steady the waters while preserving deterrence and avoiding misstep. And at home, political debate sharpens as citizens and politicians alike measure the costs of persistence. As the sirens fade and the immediate danger passes, the questions remain: how will leaders translate short-term responses into longer-term strategy? Can diplomatic channels be strengthened fast enough to prevent the next flare-up? And who ultimately will be judged by the public for the path that is chosen? In a region where the lines between war and peace have become both more blurred and more consequential, the answers will matter to more than just those who sit in government offices. They will matter to commuters and business owners, to investors and diplomats, and to families for whom every alert is a reminder of how closely global geopolitics can reach into ordinary life. Tonight, as emergency teams finish their checks and as leaders prepare for further consultations, the country waits, attentive, uneasy, and aware that the next siren may not only warn of a physical threat, but also mark another turn in a political and strategic struggle whose end is not yet visible.